My mother dropped an empty cardboard box onto my desk at exactly 9:10 in the morning. "Pack your things. You're just taking up space," she said. I had built her company's entire software architecture for 6 years without a single paycheck. Now, she was throwing me out to fund my sister's $1.5 million boutique hotel. I didn't cry. I calmly packed my files. But being evicted wasn't the worst thing Patricia did to me. 5 years later, I discovered she didn't just steal my job. She kept my digital signature to forge a federal loan. Walking out of that building felt like stepping off a treadmill that had been running too fast for 6 years. I held the cardboard box against my chest. There were no tears burning in my eyes, only the strange, cold clarity that comes when a long illusion finally shatters. Down the hall, in the main executive lounge, I could hear the faint clinking of champagne flutes. Patricia and Ashley were celebrating the new commercial loan. They were drinking to a future built on my stolen labor. I turned the corner toward the exit and stopped. Sitting on the carpeted floor, leaning against the cool drywall, was Mia. She was 8 years old, wearing a velvet dress that looked too stiff for a child, staring blankly at a tablet screen. Her mother, Ashley, was 30 feet away, laughing loudly for the board members, completely oblivious to the little girl abandoned in the hallway. I knelt down beside her. Mia looked up, her large brown eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. She did not ask why I was carrying a box. She was already used to the chaotic, unexplainable tides of this family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small set of colored pencils I kept in my desk, sliding them into her hands. I told her softly that she was smart, that she was important, and that she should always remember to read the instructions before playing a new game. It was a simple piece of advice, but I hoped it would plant a seed. When I stood up and pushed the heavy glass doors open to the parking lot, I felt the weight of the box in my arms. It was light. It held a few framed certificates, a favorite coffee mug, and a single manila folder. Inside that folder were 5 blue certified mail receipts. I traced the edge of the blue paper with my thumb before starting my car engine. Patricia thought she had stripped me down to nothing. She thought she held all the cards because she held the bank accounts. But she had never paid attention to the paperwork. They had no idea. 5 years later, the air smelled like pine needles and black coffee. I stood on the wraparound balcony of my home in the Colorado mountains, watching the morning mist roll over the peaks. The estate was quiet, anchored by thick timber beams and vast windows that let in the early light. It was not a flashy monument to wealth. It was a fortress built on absolute, undeniable competence. After Patricia evicted me, I drove west. I took my skills and obsession with data architecture and a flawless understanding of financial compliance and built a new life from the ground up. I founded an independent data analytics and fraud auditing firm. My clients were corporate boards, regional banks, and legal teams who needed someone to find the money that other people tried to hide. I spent my days reading the tiny print that everyone else skipped. I thrived in the absolute certainty of ledgers and code. Numbers, unlike family members, do not lie. They do not manipulate. They simply wait to be read. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm ceramic against my palms. It is a profound kind of luxury to sit in a house that belongs entirely to you, knowing that no one can walk through the door and demand your gratitude. I'd effectively erased Patricia and Ashley from my existence. I changed my phone number, established a new corporate entity, and let the silence stretch across half the country. I assumed they were living their extravagant dream in Ohio, burning through the $1.5 million while Ashley played the role of a visionary hotelier. I did not wish them ill. I simply did not wish them at all. I had found my rhythm in the meticulous unmasking of corporate deception. I helped honest people protect their life's work from predators. Every contract I audited, every hidden shell company I exposed, was a quiet validation of the skills Patricia had deemed worthless. I had built a thriving empire on the exact logic she had mocked. I was safe, insulated by miles of mountains and layers of impenetrable legal boundaries. Or so I thought. Peace is a quiet fortress. The tranquility of the morning broke when I stepped into my home office. It was a space designed for total focus. 3 massive monitors, acoustic paneling, and servers humming softly in the background. As I sat down to review a routine compliance report for a client, a proprietary monitoring system I had built years ago flashed a brilliant pulsing red on the corner screen. It was an identity tracking alert. I had set it up to monitor my professional credentials, my federal software architect licenses, and any corporate registries tied to my name. I clicked the notification, my heart rate remaining perfectly steady. A commercial bank in Ohio had just pinged the database, running a deep verification check on my federal registry number. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the digital breadcrumbs. The inquiry was attached to a commercial loan renewal application. The applicant was Magnolia Luxury Holdings, the corporate shell Ashley used for her boutique hotel. I pulled the raw data packets, tracing the origin of the request. Patricia and Ashley were trying to secure a massive extension on their credit line. But banks do not extend millions of dollars to failing hotels without solid collateral or top-tier operational guarantees. A cold realization settled over me, clear and sharp. They had not just kicked me out. They had kept my name on the company's compliance and security manifests. For 5 years, Patricia had been submitting automated federal forms, listing me as the chief software architect and security guarantor for her supply chain company. They were using my immaculate professional record, my creditworthiness, and my licenses to prop up the rotting foundation of Ashley's hotel dream. They threw away the daughter, but they kept the resume. I watched the red alert pulse on the screen, a digital heartbeat of their ongoing fraud. What exactly had they signed in my name? The trap was already set. People often ask me, usually with a tone of baffled pity, why I stayed for 6 years. Why would a highly skilled software engineer build a multi-million-dollar digital infrastructure for a family business without demanding a salary, a contract, or even basic respect when the red alert glowed on my screen? I found myself thinking about that invisible prison. It is easy to judge the victim from the outside, but when you are raised by a master manipulator like Patricia, you do not see the bars of the cage. You are born into a role. In our house, Ashley was the golden child. She was the trophy, the investment, the beautiful project that required endless funding and admiration. I was the utility child. My purpose was to be the quiet machinery that kept the house running. I was taught, systematically and relentlessly, that asking for compensation was an act of betrayal. Patricia used words like loyalty and legacy to mask exploitation. "We are building this together," she would say, right before handing Ashley a corporate credit card for a trip to Europe. If I complained, I was selfish. If I demanded a paycheck, I was ungrateful for the roof over my head. Over time, that dynamic normalizes. You do not realize you are drowning because the abuser fills the room with water, one drop at a time. You just learn to hold your breath longer. You convince yourself that if you work hard enough, if the code is flawless enough, eventually they will look at you and see a daughter instead of an appliance. Sitting in my Colorado office, surrounded by the success I had built with my own 2 hands, I looked back at that younger version of myself with profound grace. She had not been weak. She had been systematically conditioned to survive in a toxic ecosystem. Patricia's greatest trick was making me believe I needed her permission to exist. But looking at the fraudulent bank ping on my monitor, the last lingering thread of familial obligation snapped. They were not my family anymore. They were just another case of corporate fraud waiting to be audited. I finally saw the truth. I was 19 years old when I won the state engineering scholarship. It was a highly competitive grant, worth exactly $35,000. For a girl who had spent her teenage years quietly debugging inventory software in a windowless back office. That money was a lifeline. It was my guaranteed ticket out of the family supply chain business and into a proper university. Because I was still a teenager when the account was opened. Banking regulations required a parent to be listed as a joint custodian. Patricia gladly signed the paperwork. She smiled at the bank teller, playing the role of the proud mother to absolute perfection. When the deadline to pay my university tuition finally arrived, I logged into the portal to authorize the transfer. The account balance read 0. I remember sitting in the kitchen, staring at the glowing screen, feeling the floor drop out from under me. When I confronted Patricia, she did not even look up from her coffee. She calmly blamed a bank error, waving her hand dismissively. Later, she changed the story, claiming the funds had to be temporarily diverted to cover a sudden, catastrophic corporate tax audit. She promised to pay it back. She never did. I ended up attending a local community college at night, paying my own way by taking on freelance coding jobs, while still working for her for free during the day. 5 years later, sitting in the absolute silence of my Colorado office, I finally possessed the tools to uncover the truth. Using my master administrative access, the access they forgot to terminate when they evicted me, I pulled the archived financial ledgers from the Ohio servers. I ran a deep forensic trace on the exact date my scholarship vanished. The $35,000 had not been lost to a bank error. It had not gone to the IRS. I found the transaction neatly buried under an operational expense line labelled as professional technical training. The funds had been wired directly into a corporate shell entity. I cross-referenced the registration of that specific entity. It belonged to Ashley. It was the holding company for her very first business venture, an online luxury fashion boutique that survived for exactly 8 months before collapsing under the weight of her terrible management. Patricia had literally stolen my education to buy inventory for a failing clothing brand. The most sickening realization was not just the theft. It was the complicity. I remembered the exact week the money was transferred. Ashley had posted a glowing photograph on her social media feed. She was holding a glass of champagne, wearing a designer dress, standing in a rented warehouse. Her caption read that she was incredibly blessed to have a mother who truly believed in her dreams. Ashley knew exactly whose money she was spending. She wore my stolen college degree like a cheap accessory. At 19, I believed I was simply an unlucky daughter. At 28, staring at the immutable truth of a digital ledger, I realized I was never a daughter at all. I was a resource to be harvested. The betrayal was perfectly documented. There was only one person in our entire family who ever saw Patricia clearly. That was Grandma Cora. She was the woman who had built the original manufacturing plant in Ohio with her own bare hands. Cora was a woman of steel, grease, and ink. She possessed a brilliant, calculating mind that understood both the intricate mechanics of heavy machinery and the dark complexities of human nature. She loved me because she recognized the same quiet, unrelenting diligence in my work. Cora watched Patricia elevate Ashley onto a pedestal while treating me like an unpaid, disposable employee. She saw the vast disparity in how we were treated. Cora tried to intervene once, stepping into Patricia's office to demand I be put on a formal payroll. Patricia retaliated by threatening to cut off all access to her granddaughters, leveraging us as emotional hostages. Cora was smart enough to know that a direct, explosive war would only result in my immediate exile. So, she chose to play a much longer, quieter game. 2 months before she passed away from a sudden, massive stroke, she called me into her private study. The room always smelled heavily of old paper and peppermint. She asked me to close the door. Cora reached into the pocket of her tailored cardigan and pulled out a small, heavy brass key. It was attached to a thick silver chain. She pressed it firmly into my palm. It belonged to a secure deposit box at a private, independent bank in downtown Columbus. I asked her what was inside. She held my hand, her grip still surprisingly strong, and looked at me with absolute, chilling clarity. She told me that my mother wins every single argument by twisting words and gaslighting memories. Cora said that arguing with Patricia was a losing battle because Patricia had no relationship with the truth. So I did not leave you an argument. Hannah, Cora told me, her voice raspy but steady. I left you proof. Do not open it until you have absolutely no other choice. I wore that brass key on its silver chain around my neck for nearly a decade. It rested against my skin, a cold reminder that someone in this family had loved me enough to protect me. Even on the morning Patricia handed me the cardboard box at 9:10 and threw me out onto the street. I did not go to the bank. I knew I needed to build my own financial foundation first. I needed to establish my own unshakable ground before I could face whatever weapon Cora had left me. I had to become completely untouchable. The key waited patiently. The exact timing of my eviction had never made logical sense to me. Why that specific Tuesday? Why exactly at 9:10 in the morning it felt too staged, too perfectly orchestrated? Sitting in my Colorado office, reviewing the freshly intercepted credit alert that showed them trying to renew a massive loan, I finally decided to overlay the historical timestamps. I pulled the server logs from the day I was thrown out. The puzzle pieces locked together with a terrifying, criminal precision. At 9:10 in the morning, Patricia handed me the cardboard box and ordered me to leave the premises immediately. She stood aggressively by the door, physically ensuring I did not log back into my secure workstation to check my emails. At 11:47, exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes after I drove out of the parking lot, my electronic signature was applied to a massive commercial loan guarantee. It was the core document securing the $1.5 million for Ashley's luxury hotel project. At 12:03 in the afternoon, my administrative access to the company servers was permanently revoked from an internal IP address. At 3:20 in the afternoon, the bank verified the signed documents and authorized the very first wire transfer to Magnolia Luxury Holdings. Patricia did not kick me out in a fit of sudden, irrational rage over my attitude. She removed me because the bank required a secondary digital verification from the chief software architect, which was my exact legally registered title. She needed me physically out of the building so she could intercept the automated confirmation email from the bank. She needed a window of time to apply my forged digital signature, and then she needed to lock me out of the system before I could see the security notification on my end. It was not a family dispute. It was a calculated, premeditated financial crime. She had tied a $1.5 million anchor around my neck while I was driving away in tears, believing I was simply unloved. Patricia thought she was a genius. She thought she had executed the perfect corporate maneuver to fund her favorite daughter's dream while eliminating the daughter who asked too many questions. But she fundamentally misunderstood how technology works. She did not realize that every single keystroke, every login attempt, and every IP address creates a permanent, undeniable record. She thought she had erased me from the company. Instead, she had meticulously documented her own federal fraud. She left a digital trail. Once I understood the massive scale of the forgery, I turned my analytical focus entirely onto Magnolia Luxury Holdings. I wanted to see exactly what $1.5 million of stolen capital had built. I pulled public tax filings, registered vendor liens, and municipal zoning permits. To the outside world, Ashley had spent the last 5 years curating an image of unbridled, elite success. Her social media feeds were a continuous, exhausting parade of grand openings, local celebrity endorsements, and champagne toasts in the presidential suite. She frequently boasted in glossy lifestyle magazine interviews about being fully booked 6 months in advance. She called herself a visionary hospitality entrepreneur. But the hard data sitting on my monitors told a completely different, humiliating story. The luxury hotel was nothing but a masterclass in financial smoke and mirrors. First, the prime real estate was not purchased. It was leased under a highly predatory commercial contract that was bleeding them dry. The custom Italian furniture and imported marble fixtures were bought on high-interest, short-term credit. The reason the hotel always appeared fully booked on consumer websites was not due to overwhelming public demand. My data scrape revealed that Ashley was manually blocking out 60% of the available rooms in the back-end reservation system to create a desperate illusion of artificial scarcity. Meanwhile, behind the velvet ropes, reality was crashing down. Local caterers, boutique florists, landscapers, and commercial cleaning services were filing aggressive legal liens against the property for dozens of unpaid invoices. The staff turnover rate was catastrophic because payroll was constantly delayed. The $1.5 million had not been wisely invested. It had been systematically incinerated just to maintain Ashley's digital illusion of wealth and importance. Ashley was drowning in an ocean of bad debt, and Patricia was desperately trying to bail her out by securing even more fraudulent credit extensions using my stolen identity. They were trying to plug the holes of a rapidly sinking ship by continuing to leverage my clean credit score. They believed that as long as they kept posting filtered photos of luxury breakfasts, the math would somehow fix itself. But mathematics is utterly indifferent to aesthetics. A negative balance does not care about your brand identity. The illusion was finally cracking. I could have sat back and watched Ashley's hotel collapse with detached, clinical amusement. I could have simply reported the identity theft to the federal banking authorities, cleared my name, and walked away, without ever speaking to them again. But later that week, a second, far more sinister alert triggered on my proprietary monitoring software. This specific alert was not tied to the supply chain company, nor was it linked to the fraudulent commercial loans. It was tied to a restricted minor's trust account. It was Mia's educational fund, years ago before she passed. Grandma Cora had set up a modest, legally protected college fund for Mia. It was the only clean, untouched money left in that entire family ecosystem. The alert on my screen showed a sudden, aggressive request to liquidate the entire account balance. The legal justification listed on the withdrawal application was for severe medical treatments and specialized educational interventions. I knew instantly it was a lie. As I was pulling the forged medical documents, my personal cell phone buzzed on my desk. It was a text message from Mia. We had kept in secret sparse contact over the years through a highly secure, encrypted messaging app I had installed on her tablet before I was evicted. The message broke my heart. It read, "Aunt Hannah, Mom made me practice my signature on a weird medical form today. She said I need special school. I am not sick. What does it mean?" My blood ran completely cold. Patricia and Ashley were no longer just committing corporate fraud against a bank or stealing from me. They were actively fabricating severe medical records to drain an 8-year-old child's future. They were doing this just to pay off a few more weeks of interest on a failing, superficial hotel. They were willing to sacrifice Mia's entire education and label her with a fake medical condition just to keep the champagne flowing in the executive suite. That was the absolute line. It was one thing to steal my past. It was unforgivable to cannibalize a child's future. I closed the monitoring window and stood up from my desk. I was no longer just an auditor observing a crime. It was time to act. When I first arrived in Colorado 5 years ago, I did not have a grand master plan to build an empire. I only had a modest savings account, a very old laptop, and an absolute refusal to ever be used as a utility again. I rented a tiny, drafty apartment above a struggling bakery and started offering freelance financial compliance audits to local small businesses. I knew how supply chains worked. More importantly, I knew exactly how people hid money within them. My very first client was a family-owned logistics firm that was inexplicably losing cash every quarter despite record sales. They handed me 3 years of messy, disorganized financial records in a dozen heavy binders. They expected me to take weeks. I found the systemic leak in exactly 4 days. A mid-level manager had been quietly skimming percentages off fuel surcharges through a dummy corporation. I did not just hand the owners a report. I handed them a fully documented recovery plan. Word of mouth in the business community travels faster than any marketing campaign. When you prove that you can find the missing numbers that everyone else is too lazy or too easily manipulated to see, people start knocking on your door. Within 2 years, I had moved out of the apartment above the bakery and leased a proper commercial office space. I hired a team of dedicated forensic accountants and software engineers. We specialized in untangling complex corporate fraud, intellectual property disputes, and hidden liabilities. My clients were no longer local bakeries. They were regional banks, institutional investors, and corporate boards who needed absolute, unimpeachable truth. I built my reputation on a very simple premise. I read the fine print that arrogant people assume will be ignored. I never posted my achievements on social media. I did not buy magazine spreads or host lavish, fake networking galas like Ashley did. I poured my profits into secure, long-term investments. I bought my mountain estate quietly, with a conventional mortgage that I paid down systematically. My success was silent, heavy, and completely real. I had spent my entire youth being told by Patricia that I had no vision, no spark, and no real value to the family. Looking at my thriving firm, I realized she was right about one thing. I had no value to a family built on lies. My value existed only in the light of truth. The foundation was solid stone. When I discovered that Patricia was trying to drain Mia's educational fund, my instinct was to immediately sever their access to my software infrastructure. I could have executed a remote kill switch that afternoon. The entire Ohio supply chain company would have ground to a terrifying, catastrophic halt within seconds. Without the core software I had built, they could not process a single shipping order, issue a single invoice, or track a single piece of inventory. It would have been an instant, fatal blow to Patricia's arrogant reign. But I am not Patricia. I do not destroy innocent people just to win a personal war. The company in Ohio employed over 120 people. These were warehouse workers, forklift operators, and administrative staff who had families, mortgages, and quiet lives. They had nothing to do with Patricia's corporate fraud or Ashley's ridiculous vanity hotel. If I simply pulled the plug, those workers would lose their jobs, their health insurance, and their livelihoods without any warning. I refused to let my righteous retaliation become someone else's unearned tragedy. I sat at my desk and drafted a very precise, legally binding transition agreement. It was a generous olive branch disguised as a legal contract. I offered Patricia a temporary 45-day emergency software license. The terms were extremely simple and non-negotiable. During those 45 days, the company could continue to operate normally. However, all incoming revenue had to be placed in a restricted escrow account managed by a neutral third party. The funds could only be used for employee payroll, basic operational costs, and vendor payments. The most important clause was clearly highlighted. Not a single dollar could be transferred to Ashley, to Magnolia Luxury Holdings, or to any entity associated with the boutique hotel. Furthermore, Patricia had to immediately submit to an independent financial audit. It was a fair, structured path to survival. It gave her the opportunity to save her employees and gracefully unwind her failing empire without catastrophic collateral damage. I printed the agreement on thick, watermarked paper. I signed it with a steady hand. I mailed it overnight to her executive office in Ohio. I gave her a choice. Grace is a quiet weapon. I tracked the overnight package meticulously. The delivery confirmation showed that Patricia received the transition agreement at 10:15 the following morning. I gave her 48 hours to review the document with her corporate counsel. I fully expected her to be furious, to scream at her office walls, but ultimately, I assumed her survival instinct would force her to sign. I underestimated the sheer, blinding depth of her arrogance. On the third day, instead of a signed contract, I received a notification from my media monitoring software. Patricia had not hired an independent auditor to save her factory workers. Instead, she had taken the last available drops of the company's operating cash and hired a local crisis management public relations firm. A prominent business journal in Ohio published a scathing, highly sensationalized article about me. The headline painted a picture of a greedy, estranged, millionaire daughter living in a Colorado mansion, actively trying to destroy a beloved family legacy out of petty jealousy. The article quoted Patricia extensively. She played the heartbroken, betrayed matriarch perfectly. She claimed I was holding the company's software hostage, demanding extortionate licensing fees that would force her to lay off dozens of loyal, hard-working families. She completely omitted the fact that I had offered a free 45-day transition license. She omitted the forged $1.5 million loan. She omitted the theft of Mia's educational trust. She simply pointed at me and told the world I was the villain. I sat in my quiet office, reading the article on my monitor. I did not feel a spike of anger. I did not feel the urge to call a reporter and defend myself. I actually felt a profound, settling peace by tearing up my transition agreement and launching a public smear campaign. Patricia had officially made her choice. She had prioritized her ego and Ashley's fake hotel over the survival of her own company and the livelihoods of her employees. She had rejected the only life raft I was willing to offer. The moral ledger was completely balanced. She had given me the green light to proceed without a single ounce of guilt. The game was finally over. It was time to use the weapon Grandma Cora had left me. I booked a quiet, early morning flight to Columbus, Ohio. I did not tell anyone I was coming. I rented a car and drove directly to the old, stone-faced Independent Bank downtown. I walked into the lobby, feeling the cool, conditioned air and smelling the faint scent of polished brass and old paper. I presented my identification to the vault manager, along with the heavy brass key Cora had pressed into my palm nearly a decade ago. The vault was silent. The manager left me alone in a small, private viewing room with a long metal deposit box. My hands did not shake as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on top of a stack of legal documents, was a handwritten letter on Cora's personal stationery. Her handwriting was sharp and slanted. She wrote that she knew Patricia would eventually try to strip me of everything I had built. She knew Patricia viewed my talent as a resource to be mined rather than a gift to be nurtured. Beneath the letter was a thick, bound legal document. It was an irrevocable trust, established and notarized over 10 years ago. When Cora founded the manufacturing plant, she retained the absolute intellectual property rights to all internal operational systems. The trust clearly stated that the foundational architecture of the company and all subsequent digital iterations, patches and code bases developed by me were placed under the sole, impenetrable protection of this trust. I was the sole beneficiary and the absolute legal owner of the intellectual property. Patricia did not own the software I had coded for 6 years without pay. The company did not own it. They had simply been operating under a highly conditional, undocumented grace period that I could legally revoke at any second. Cora had essentially built a legal fortress around my mind, ensuring that whenever Patricia finally pushed me out, she would inadvertently pull the plug on her own company. If you have ever found a piece of evidence that changed everything, drop a receipt in the comments below. I held the trust in my hands, The paper was crisp and heavy with absolute authority. Cora had not just protected me, she had handed me the exact mechanism to dismantle the fraud. I placed the documents carefully into my leather briefcase. I walked out into the sun. Returning to Colorado, I prepared for the inevitable legal warfare. I knew Patricia would not surrender simply because I revoked a software license. She would lie, she would forge documents, and she would attempt to legally bury me to protect Ashley's failing hotel. I walked to the back of my office closet and pulled out the battered cardboard box Patricia had forced upon me 5 years ago. I opened it and took out the single manila folder. Inside were 5 small blue paper slips. They were United States Postal Service certified mail return receipts. When I was evicted at 9:10 in the morning, I knew Patricia would eventually try to manipulate the timeline. So, the very next day, 5 years ago, I had mailed 5 highly specific legal notices to the company headquarters. The first receipt proved delivery of my formal, immediate resignation from all technical and administrative roles. The second receipt proved delivery of a demand to immediately remove my name from all corporate banking manifests and liability profiles. The third receipt was a formal notification terminating their right to use my electronic signature for any internal or external documents. The fourth receipt revoked any implied consent for the ongoing use of my proprietary code base. The fifth receipt was a direct notice to Ashley's holding company, warning them that the capital they were receiving was tied to contested corporate assets. I looked closely at the blue slips. They were not just pieces of paper. They were a meticulously constructed, chronological defense mechanism. On the back of the first 3 receipts was Patricia's unmistakable, looping signature, confirming she had received and signed for the warnings exactly 5 years ago. On the 5th receipt, confirming delivery to the boutique hotel's registered address, was Ashley's signature. They could cry to the media. They could claim ignorance to the banks. They could tell their expensive lawyers that I was a rogue hacker trying to steal their legacy. But they could never, ever argue with the United States Postal Service. These 5 blue receipts proved, beyond a shadow of a legal doubt, that both Patricia and Ashley knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I had withdrawn my consent, and they proceeded to commit federal bank fraud anyway. The trap was permanently locked. While mapping the exact flow of the $1.5 million from the fraudulent commercial loan, my forensic software flagged a deeply fascinating anomaly. I had assumed Ashley was simply incompetent. I assumed she was burning through Patricia's stolen capital by overpaying for exotic flowers, imported marble, and pointless influencer marketing campaigns. But as I drilled down into the hotel's account's payable ledger, I realized I had severely underestimated my sister's capacity for calculated deception. Ashley was not just a terrible business owner, she was actively running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme against our mother. The hotel's largest single expense line was interior design and furnishing procurement. The vendor receiving these massive payouts was a boutique design firm registered in Delaware. I pulled the corporate registration records for the firm. The listed managing director was a registered agent. But the ultimate beneficial owner, hidden behind the corporate veil, was Ashley herself. She had set up a classic shell company. The mechanics of the fraud were beautifully simple and incredibly malicious. When the hotel needed lobby furniture, Ashley's shell company would purchase a set of sofas for $18,000 from a wholesale supplier. Her shell company would then immediately generate an invoice to Magnolia Luxury Holdings for $61,000. Patricia, acting as the blind financial guarantor, would authorize the bank to pay the invoice using the loan money. The $43,000 difference flowed directly into Ashley's private offshore accounts. Patricia thought she was funding a legacy. She thought she was supporting the golden child's brilliant entrepreneurial vision. In reality, Ashley was systematically siphoning the cash out of the hotel before it inevitably collapsed. She knew the business model was completely unsustainable. She knew the vendors would eventually sue, and the bank would eventually foreclose. She was quietly packing her own golden parachute, perfectly willing to let Patricia go down with the sinking ship. I stared at the financial flowcharts on my screen. Patricia had sacrificed me, stolen my education, and committed federal forgery, all to feed a daughter who was quietly robbing her blind. There is a profound irony in watching two manipulators slowly destroy each other from the inside out. They were bound by blood, but entirely separated by greed. I saved the offshore routing numbers and the shell company invoices to a secure drive. I did not need to invent a punishment for them. They were eating themselves alive. People often misunderstand how real justice is achieved. Television teaches us that victory comes from dramatic courtroom speeches, tearful confrontations, and explosive yelling matches. In the real world, especially in corporate fraud, justice is entirely administrative. It is cold, quiet, and determined by timestamps. When Patricia forged my digital signature on the commercial loan documents at exactly 11:47 in the morning, she relied on the assumption that her word as a respected business owner would outweigh mine. She thought she could easily claim I had signed the paperwork before she fired me. But an irrevocable trust and federal banking regulations do not care about a mother's fabricated story. Grandma Cora had legally severed the intellectual property from the company a decade ago. That was my first layer of absolute protection. The second layer was geographical reality. At 11:47 in the morning, 5 years ago, I was not in the Ohio corporate office. I was driving west. I opened my digital archives and pulled two specific pieces of evidence. The first was a credit card receipt for $24.50, spent at a gas station located in Indiana, over 200 miles away from Patricia's desk. The timestamp on the transaction was exactly 11:46. The second piece of evidence was a subpoenaed security camera, still from that exact gas station, showing me standing by my car, swiping my card. You cannot digitally sign a federal loan guarantee on a secure local server in Ohio while simultaneously buying unleaded fuel in Indiana. The forgery was utterly indisputable. I did not have to argue with Patricia. I did not have to plead with a judge to believe my character over hers. The metadata did all the fighting for me. This is the ultimate power of process. A lie requires constant maintenance, emotional manipulation, and a willing audience to survive. The truth requires absolutely nothing but a filing cabinet. I gathered the trust documents, the 5 certified mail receipts, the shell company invoices, and the gas station timestamp. I organized them into a single, perfectly indexed master file. I looked at the complete narrative of their crimes, neatly bound in digital ink. They had relied on my silence and my perceived weakness. They forgot that I was the one who built the system they used to steal from me. The math was finally complete. I scheduled an urgent, secure video conference with my elite corporate legal team in Denver. I did not hire family lawyers or mediators. I hired aggressive, meticulous litigators who specialized in federal intellectual property disputes and commercial bank fraud. When I shared my screen and walked them through the master file, the lead attorney sat in stunned silence for a full minute. I showed them the irrevocable trust from Grandma Cora. I showed them the 5 blue postal receipts bearing Patricia and Ashley's signatures. I showed them the 1147 timestamp forgery. Finally, I showed them the forged medical documents Patricia was preparing to submit to drain Mia's educational fund. The attorneys did not ask if I wanted to negotiate a settlement. They asked how quickly I wanted to dismantle the company. I gave them precise, uncompromising instructions. First, we were filing an emergency injunction to permanently revoke Patricia's license to use my supply chain software, effectively, immediately. Second, we were sending a comprehensive legal disclosure directly to the commercial bank holding the $1.5 million loan, informing them that the collateral guaranteeing their funds was entirely fraudulent. Third, we were filing an immediate petition in family court to freeze Mia's trust, using the forged medical records as proof of imminent financial endangerment. My lead attorney drafted the cease and desist notices. The language was cold, absolute, and stripped of any familial sentiment. It referred to Patricia solely as the violating corporate officer. I reviewed the final drafts on my monitor. Everything I had endured for 6 years. The unpaid labour, the stolen scholarship, the eviction, the gaslighting was distilled into these 3 legal strikes. We were not going to warn her. We were simply going to turn off the lights. If you are ready to see what happens when the paper trail finally catches up to the people who thought they were untouchable, hit subscribe and tell me you are ready for the fallout. I authorized the electronic delivery of the notices to the bank, the courts, and the company servers. I took a deep breath of the cool Colorado air. I pressed the enter key. It was exactly 9 a.m. on a Monday in Ohio. The factory floor was usually buzzing with forklift sirens, incoming delivery trucks, and the frantic clicking of inventory scanners. In the main executive office, Patricia would be taking her first sip of coffee, assuming she was still the untouchable queen of her domain. At 9:01, my automated revocation protocol executed perfectly. Every single computer terminal, every inventory tablet, and every logistics dashboard in the entire facility instantly froze. The operational interfaces vanished. In their place, a stark white screen appeared with a single, legally approved message in bold black text: proprietary software, license revoked. Unauthorized access prohibited by federal intellectual property law. Simultaneously, a courier walked into the commercial bank across town and hand-delivered my attorney's disclosure packet directly to the Vice President of Commercial Lending. The bank executive opened the file, saw the forged 1147 signature and the copy of the irrevocable trust, and immediately triggered their internal fraud protocols. Within 14 minutes, Patricia's entire corporate credit line was permanently frozen. The automated clearinghouse payments scheduled for the hotel's vendors were abruptly blocked. Back at the factory, the trucks stopped loading. The shipping manifests could not be printed. The payroll system, inextricably linked to the core database, locked down completely. The company was paralyzed. For 5 years, Patricia had operated under the delusion that she was a brilliant CEO simply because she held the checkbook. She never understood that I was the actual nervous system of the company. Without my code, her empire was just an empty warehouse full of confused employees. I sat in my Colorado office, watching the remote server diagnostics flatline one by one. I did not feel a rush of malicious joy. I felt the profound, sobering weight of a scale finally tipping back to zero. Patricia had spent her entire life taking things that did not belong to her. Now, the fundamental architecture of her reality had been switched off. The screens stayed entirely dark. My private cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. I looked at the glowing screen. For the first time in 5 long years, the caller identification displayed Patricia's name. She had somehow bypassed my standard blocks, likely using a subordinate's phone to bypass the filters before transferring the call. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sit in the suffocating silence of her dead office before I answered. "Hannah!" Patricia barked the moment the line connected. There was no greeting. There was no hesitation. "The servers are down. Fix this glitch right now. I have shipments waiting, and the bank is calling me about some ridiculous lock on the accounts." She was still using her commanding, maternal CEO voice, expecting me to immediately shrink back into the obedient, unpaid utility child she had evicted. "It is not a glitch. Patricia," I said. My voice was calm, even, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Your software license has been permanently revoked. You no longer have the right to use my intellectual property." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "You little brat," she hissed, her facade cracking instantly. "I own that company. I own everything in it. You will turn it back on, or I will have my lawyers sue you into oblivion. Your lawyers cannot sue me for taking back what belongs to an irrevocable trust." I replied smoothly. "And they certainly cannot help you with the commercial loan. I was buying gas in Indiana at exactly 11:47 in the morning 5 years ago. Patricia, the bank currently has the camera footage and the transaction receipt. They know my signature on your loan guarantee is a forgery." The line went completely, absolutely dead silent. The heavy, suffocating realization of her own demise traveled across the cellular network. She had no leverage, no technical access, and no defense against federal bank fraud. I did not wait for her to formulate another lie or launch into a screaming fit. I simply tapped the red icon on my screen, severing the connection. The phone clicked completely shut. When the commercial bank permanently froze the $1.5 million credit line, the shockwaves hit Magnolia Luxury Holdings almost immediately. It started with the small things. A local premium bakery refused to deliver the morning pastry order because their automatic payment bounced. By noon, the corporate credit cards used by the hotel purchasing department were declining at the wholesale floral markets. Ashley was sitting in the presidential suite when the hotel manager knocked on the door, holding a stack of declined vendor invoices. For 5 years, Ashley had operated under the assumption that Patricia's checkbook was an infinite, magical resource. But Ashley was not stupid. She was simply parasitic. She had been trained by Patricia, which meant she possessed the exact same ruthless survival instincts. The moment the manager explained that the main corporate accounts were locked under a federal fraud investigation protocol, Ashley did not call Patricia to ask how they could save the family business. She did not formulate a plan to reassure her staff. She immediately locked the door to the suite and opened her secure laptop. She logged into the offshore accounts tied to her hidden interior design shell company, the company she had used to siphon $43,000 here and $22,000 there from her own mother. There was over $400,000 sitting in that hidden account. She executed a series of rapid, untraceable wire transfers, moving every single penny into a private, decentralized digital wallet. Then she walked into her massive walk-in closet and pulled down 3 large designer leather suitcases. She packed her most expensive jewelry, her high-end electronics, and her tailored clothing. She did not pack anything for her 8-year-old daughter, Mia. She left Mia in the care of a confused hotel nanny, claiming she had to leave for an urgent investor meeting in another state. Ashley walked out through the private rear exit of the hotel, loaded her bags into a waiting luxury town car, and quietly disappeared. She left Patricia to face the angry vendors, the unpaid employees, and the federal bank investigators entirely alone. Patricia had sacrificed her youngest daughter to build an empire for her favorite child, and the favorite child had stripped the copper wire from the walls before the building even collapsed. She simply walked away. Patricia did not surrender. Surrender requires humility, and Patricia only understood dominance. When she realized the Ohio supply chain company was paralyzed and the hotel was facing imminent foreclosure, she decided to execute one final aggressive maneuver. She found a highly aggressive, expensive litigation firm in Colorado that specialized in corporate sabotage cases. She paid their massive retainer using the last remnants of her personal retirement savings. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a legal courier walked into my pristine Colorado office and handed my receptionist a thick, menacing stack of court documents. Patricia was suing me for $10 million in damages. She filed an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order, demanding the immediate freezing of all my personal and corporate assets. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of fabricated victimhood. Patricia submitted 3 sworn legal affidavits from loyal managers at the Ohio plant. They falsely testified that I had maliciously hacked into the corporate servers, illegally deleted crucial operational data, and extorted the company to destroy my mother's legacy. Patricia even claimed that the irrevocable trust was a fraudulent document I had somehow forced Grandma Cora to sign when she was experiencing severe cognitive decline. For a brief, tense 24 hours, the lies looked incredibly real. 2 of my newest corporate clients called me, their voices tight with concern after reading the public court filings. My own bank flagged my business accounts for review due to the pending injunction. Patricia had successfully engineered a media and legal narrative that painted me as a rogue, vengeful hacker trying to bankrupt a beloved family institution. She thought the sheer pressure of a massive federal lawsuit would cause me to panic, cave in, and sign the software rights back over to her. She thought I would be terrified of the courtroom. She forgot that auditing is just the legal dissection of lies. The trap was beautifully flawed. The preliminary hearing took place in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in downtown Denver. Patricia did not fly out, but her lead attorney stood at the plaintiff's table, looking incredibly smug. He launched into a passionate, dramatic opening statement, painting me as a bitter, estranged daughter who had weaponized my technical skills to destroy a thriving family business. He demanded the judge immediately freeze my assets and force me to surrender the software code base. My lead attorney did not interrupt. He let the man speak for 15 uninterrupted minutes. When it was our turn, my lawyer stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the bench with a single, slim binder. He did not give a dramatic speech. He simply presented the empirical data. First, he submitted the certified medical and legal evaluations conducted on Grandma Cora the exact day the irrevocable trust was signed 10 years ago. 2 independent neurologists and a court-appointed notary verified she was in perfect cognitive health. The narrative of elder abuse evaporated instantly. Next, he submitted the complete, unedited cloud audit logs from the Ohio corporate servers. The data proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had not deleted a single file. The logs clearly showed that the destructive data wipe had been executed by a super administrator account created for Patricia. 2 full days after I had been evicted, Patricia had deliberately destroyed her own internal records to manufacture evidence against me. Finally, my attorney placed the 5 blue certified mail receipts on the polished wooden table. He projected the scanned images onto the courtroom screen. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking at Patricia's looping signature, confirming she had received the formal revocation of my software license exactly 5 years ago. He looked at Ashley's signature, confirming she knew the loan collateral was contested. The opposing counsel stared at the 5 blue receipts. The smug confidence drained from his face, replaced by a pale, visible terror. He realized his client had lied to him, and he had just submitted perjured affidavits and fabricated claims to a federal judge. He immediately requested a recess. 10 minutes later, Patricia's expensive legal team formally petitioned the court to withdraw as her counsel, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts. The entire $10 million lawsuit collapsed in less than 45 minutes. The lawyers walked out. The withdrawal of Patricia's legal team was the final domino. Without a defense, and with the undeniable proof of federal bank fraud and perjury sitting in the public court record, the entire facade disintegrated with breathtaking speed. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was a slow, clinical, administrative liquidation. The commercial bank officially declared the $1.5 million loan in default. Since the loan was originally secured by fraudulent intellectual property and Patricia's personal guarantees, the bank moved aggressively to seize whatever tangible assets remained. Magnolia Luxury Holdings was forced into involuntary bankruptcy. A team of federal receivers descended on the boutique hotel. They padlocked the glass doors, repossessed the unpaid Italian leather sofas, and auctioned off the imported marble fixtures for pennies on the dollar. In Ohio, the situation was equally devastating for Patricia. Unable to process orders or maintain inventory without my software architecture, the supply chain company bled clients rapidly. The board of directors, terrified of the looming federal fraud investigations, voted to remove Patricia from her position as chief executive officer. They placed the company into receivership. Patricia lost the corporate headquarters. She lost her company car because she had signed personal guarantees to cover Ashley's spiraling debts. The banks eventually placed liens on her private accounts and her sprawling suburban home. Everything she had spent decades building through manipulation, unpaid labor, and favoritism was dismantled by a team of neutral forensic accountants. She had sacrificed my future, stolen my education, and forged my name, all to build an empire of paper. Now, a different set of papers had come to collect the ultimate debt. I monitored the public bankruptcy filings from the quiet safety of my Colorado office, watching the numbers drop to 0. It was all gone. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the security intercom on my estate gate buzzed. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a new corporate audit file. I tapped the screen to view the security camera feed. Standing outside the heavy iron gates of my beachfront villa was Patricia. She looked entirely different from the arrogant woman who had slid a cardboard box across a table 5 years ago. Her designer coat looked wrinkled, her posture was slumped, and she carried a thick manila folder clutched desperately to her chest. I pressed the intercom button. I did not say hello. I simply waited. "Hannah," her voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded hollow, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "They took the house. Ashley is gone. I have absolutely nowhere else to go." I watched her through the high-definition lens. Any normal person might have expected her to ask about Mia, the 8-year-old granddaughter abandoned by Ashley. A mother might have offered a desperate, tearful apology for the stolen scholarship or the forged federal documents. But Patricia was incapable of true remorse. "I brought the restructuring papers," she continued, her voice gaining a frantic, manic edge. "If you just sign a new software license and guarantee a small bridge loan, the bank said they might pause the liquidation. We can save the business. You can have your old job back. We can fix this." She had lost her company, her home, and her favorite daughter. Yet she was still standing at my gate, trying to turn me back into an unpaid utility. She did not want reconciliation. She wanted a lifeline. "I am not signing your loan, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. "And you are not coming inside. You cannot leave your own mother on the street," she screamed, hitting the iron bars with her hand. "5 years ago, you told me I was just taking up space." I replied, "I will not let you sleep on the street. I have arranged something else." I pressed a button on my console. 2 minutes later, my private security guard walked down the driveway to the gate. He did not open it. He simply slipped a small envelope through the iron bars. Inside was a prepaid voucher for 3 nights at a local, modest motel, along with a printed list of reputable bankruptcy attorneys in her area. I had given her exactly what the law required: due process and a safe exit. I turned off the intercom monitor and went back to my audit file. The gate clicked shut. The destruction of Patricia's empire was a mathematical necessity, but I never intended to leave a crater of collateral damage in my wake. My retaliation was meticulously precise, targeting only the parasites who had engineered the fraud. Once the dust settled and the federal bankruptcy courts began their slow, grinding work, I shifted my focus to the only 2 things that actually mattered: a child's future and the livelihoods of innocent people. My legal team filed an immediate, aggressive emergency petition in family court regarding Mia's educational trust. We presented the forged medical records Patricia had attempted to submit, alongside irrefutable documented evidence of Ashley's sudden flight out of the state with embezzled corporate funds. The presiding judge was absolutely appalled. He immediately stripped both Patricia and Ashley of any custodial access to the account. I did not ask to absorb the money for myself. Instead, I formally petitioned the court to appoint an independent, state-certified trustee to manage the funds strictly for Mia's long-term education. I also legally secured full emergency guardianship. When Mia arrived at my estate in Colorado, she looked small but incredibly brave. She brought her tablet, her beloved colored pencils, and a quiet resilience that reminded me entirely too much of myself at that age. I enrolled her in an excellent local academy. I made sure she understood that her only job in this house was to be a child. She is safe. She will never be used as a financial pawn or an unpaid utility. Back in Ohio, the factory floor workers were facing imminent unemployment as the corporate receivership process officially began. They were honest people who had actually built Grandma Cora's original vision with their own sweat. I refused to let them pay the price for Patricia's arrogance. I had my corporate lawyers reach out directly to the floor managers and the local union representatives. We proposed a radical, entirely legal solution. I personally funded the legal fees to help them establish a worker-owned cooperative. Once their new, independent legal entity was fully finalized, I drafted a brand new contract. I granted their cooperative a perpetual, exclusive license to use my proprietary supply chain software architecture for exactly $1 a year. Patricia had lost the company, but the workers kept their jobs, their pensions, and their dignity. They bypassed corporate greed entirely and took direct control of their own production. I saved Cora's true legacy by completely excising the disease that had infected it. I watched the local news coverage from my quiet office. The anchors praised the historic workers' buyout. Patricia was merely a cautionary footnote in her own story. I looked out into the living room, watching Mia sketch the mountains through the glass. The cycle was officially broken. I still have the battered cardboard box Patricia handed me at 9:10 in the morning 5 years ago. It sits on the bottom shelf of a locked, fireproof filing cabinet in my Colorado office. It no longer holds a sense of terror, inadequacy, or rejection. It holds the absolute, empirical truth of my survival. Sometimes I take out the manila folder and look at those 5 blue certified mail receipts. I do not look at them to gloat over my mother's downfall. I look at them to remind myself of the exact price of my own freedom. People who have never lived inside a toxic ecosystem often tell you that family is everything. They insist that blood is a sacred, unbreakable contract. But shared DNA does not give anyone the right to steal your future, forge your signature, or sacrifice your sanity to fund their delusions. I had to learn the hardest lesson a daughter can ever learn. Family is not a suicide pact. Patricia expected me to fade away silently simply because I was the quiet one. She assumed my lack of explosive anger indicated a lack of intelligence. She never understood that silence is just a workspace for calculation. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I did not beg. I simply documented reality. I built an impenetrable fortress out of federal timestamps, notary stamps, and cloud audit logs. I fought her not with venom, but with absolute administrative precision. The Magnolia Luxury Hotel is now a generic corporate chain. The Ohio Supply Chain Company is thriving under the direct ownership of the people who actually operate the heavy machinery. Ashley is somewhere chasing another expensive illusion. And Patricia is living in a small apartment, finally learning how to survive without a host to feed on. I do not carry any hatred for them in my heart. Hatred is a heavy, useless emotion that clouds data. I only carry the quiet peace of someone who knows they executed the correct equation. I look at Mia, thriving in a home where love is not a conditional transaction. I look at my business, built on protecting honest people from the exact kind of manipulation I survived. I finally understand what Grandma Cora meant when she handed me that brass key. Legacy is not what you inherit, it is what you fiercely protect. Sometimes, abandoning a rotting tree is not an act of betrayal. It is the only mathematical way to survive. If you have ever had to walk away to save yourself, share this story. You never know who needs the courage to pack their own box today. I placed the blue receipts back into the manila folder. I set the folder inside the box and folded the cardboard flaps down. The box clicked shut.